Hi, my name is Cheryl White. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I'm an injection and illegal drug user, injection drug user. I've been an illegal drug user since the age of 12, and I've been an injection drug user since the age of 24, and I'm now 40. I'm also someone that's living with bipolar disease, which is what they call manic depression traditionally. And I just want to talk briefly about the notion of self-medicating and harm reduction and pleasure maximization and what those words mean in my life. I'm a longtime drug user activist, and now I'm doing work more and more on the international scene. And the message that I've been working with and trying to get across to people more lately has been the message of pleasure maximization, or doing drugs in a way that maximizes the benefits we can get from doing drugs. And I've come to this part of this philosophy at this time in my life because it was only recently that I got my diagnosis that I am bipolar. And prior to getting this diagnosis, like I said, I've been an illegal drug user since I was a child. And once I got the diagnosis, I was able to look back over the course of my life, and I realized that most of the drug use that I was involved in because I was self-medicating. And what I mean by that is I was taking drugs to deal with the effects of my mental illness, mostly because I didn't know I was mentally ill. And I had been working in the harm reduction field since I was 16. I was involved in having needle exchanges legalized in Canada, and I've organized and worked in needle exchanges and set up HIV anonymous testing clinics. And now I'm doing more consultancy work and a lot of writing, and I have the privilege of being invited to conferences like this, the International Harm Reduction Conference, to present on this idea of pleasure maximization. Before I got my diagnosis, like I said, I was using drugs to deal with the symptoms of my disorder. And a lot of people who are bipolar like me have what's called a paradoxical effect of their drugs, which means when I do cocaine, I feel calm, and when I do heroin, I feel excited and up and energized. So when I was severely depressed, suicidally depressed, in the depressed phase of my illness, I did a lot of heroin. I did cocaine too, but I did a lot of heroin, injected it, and found that was extremely helpful in dealing with that particular symptom, my depression, which, as I said, was suicidally depressed. I tried to take my life on a number of occasions. The most recent time I tried to take my life was in May of 2006. I did a massive overdose of Dilaudid and clonazepam, and effectively died and was brought back to life and was in intensive care for 10 days. And what happened was I flipped while I was in the hospital, and I became manic. And it was that process and the doctors being there that allowed me to finally get a diagnosis, because they saw me switch from suicidally depressed to euphorically manic, talking a mile a minute, kind of like I'm doing right now, and just basically being up. I no longer wanted to kill myself. I had a joie de vivre. I wanted to get out there and get back to work and get back on my feet. I lost 106 pounds in 16 months, and basically felt like my life was starting over again. And I still didn't get the diagnosis at that point, and so what I did to deal with the symptoms of being manic all the time was I did cocaine. And I know that sounds crazy, but like I said, I had a paradoxical effect, and it grounded me. Things became out of control around December of 2006. The mania got too much for me, and I found myself having extreme panic attacks where I would be lying on the floor and I wouldn't be able to move for 45 minutes at a time, and I wouldn't be able to sleep or eat for 5 or 6 days at a time. And it was one of those episodes where I couldn't sleep or eat, where I knew I had to put myself back in the hospital because I was losing touch with reality and I was going crazy in my mind. And they put me on Valium in the hospital, and I finally got to talk to a psychiatrist, and it was that psychiatrist who suggested to me that maybe I had a mental disease, a mental disorder, and that it was bipolar disorder. By the way, it's like 40 degrees here, so pardon my wiping myself. And so once I got the diagnosis, I got the medication that I needed, and I've been put on an antipsychotic as well as a sleeping aid. And that really provided me with the space in my life for once to look at my drug use from a position of not so much needing it to live or to survive whatever phase I was in, to looking at it as an activity that required me to do some critical thinking. Why do I use the way I use? And do I use simply to self-medicate, or do I use because it's pleasurable? And I realized for me it was a little bit of both. And so what I want to talk about very briefly now is this concept of pleasure maximization. You're not going to hear that word very often from very many people because it's quite taboo, even within the field of harm reduction. The idea that a person can do drugs and can do drugs in a way that maximizes their life experiences is very frightening to a lot of people. People in the medical field, very much so to people in the traditional addictions field, and even somewhat to people in the harm reduction field. Because harm reduction, for the most part nowadays, is about pragmatism, and unfortunately sometimes pragmatism comes at the expense of drug users. And what I mean by that is, I'm a harm reduction worker. I've worked in the field for a long time, and I'm used to saying things to funders like, give me 8 cents for a new needle now, or give me $800,000 6 months from now so I can treat the same person for HIV and hepatitis C. That's pragmatism, and it doesn't really offer a big space to talk about. Let's talk about the pleasurable aspects of drugs. Let's talk about the good things it does in our life. Quite frankly, self-medicating with illegal drugs saved my life and kept me alive for 30 years. And it's only now that I have the diagnosis and I have actual medication that I'm freed up and I can say to myself, well, what do drugs bring to me now? And I realized that I very much enjoy doing certain drugs, especially heroin. I love it. It brings me euphoria, it brings me energy, especially when I'm feeling low. And for the first time in my life, I'm able to use recreationally as opposed to chaotically and habitually. And that's how I used when I was self-medicating. And the more I talk to other drug users in the field, the more I realize that self-medicating is a large and widespread phenomenon among a lot of illegal drug users.